Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. My name is Ron and I will be your host for this discussion that we're going to have. If you are here, I presume that you are interested in strategy game and strategy game programming. We're going to be talking a lot about a particular game that I worked on for a long time. We're going to be talking about C++, which is my native language, and all that. Before we get started too much, I'm going to give you a little bit of background on who I am, because, you know, what qualifies me to do a channel like this? And the answer to that is, well, nothing really. I have some experience in this field, and I'll talk about my experience. But you know, don't consider me an expert or anything. I'm not. You know, this isn't a professional gig for me. So, but I do have some knowledge. I think it'll be helpful for us to talk about these things. I'm sure I'll learn stuff as we go along. I always do when I do any project. I think you know everything there is to know about programming or C++ or a particular thing, but you'll still learn stuff as you're going along. Okay, so a little bit of background about me. So, like I said, my name is Ron. So, who am I? Let's start with that. So, you guys are not looking at a blank screen. How do we want to do this? So, my name's Ron. I'll leave it at that. If you want to know my last name, you can find it. It's all over the place, but I'll leave it at that. I don't want to dox myself too much. My background is I was a professional programmer, so we'll put that in for basically right after I got out of college. Now I graduated college with degrees in molecular biology and biochemistry, which are science degrees. But I was really interested in programming. For a while, I was a computer science major, and but I didn't super love the curriculum that we had, so I moved over to science. But I never lost the desire to program, and I became a professional programmer, kind of an independent programmer, catering towards scientific equipment. So I would go to the labs; they would need a particular piece of equipment that maybe they had software for, but it wasn't doing exactly what they wanted, or they had some pieces of equipment that really didn't have any kind of great interface collect data. And anyway, I take that data and whatever file that particular piece of equipment produced and change it into something human readable. That was kind of my niche. I did that for a few years, mostly in C++. I've got some background in other languages, most notably C#. Mostly C#. I've done some other stuff, assembly, basic a little bit, but mostly I program in C++. That's my native language. So yeah, I did that for a while. But the reality of the industry at the time, there were a lot of small companies doing kind of this thing that I targeted, and I fell into that niche, and for a while it worked out pretty well for me. Nobody else was doing that, and so my services were in pretty high demand for a while. But what ended up happening was those companies started merging together. And as smaller companies become bigger companies, they tend to start getting their own IT departments, which means my services were no longer required for those two companies that merged together. And it started to become a problem. And at one point, I realized, or at the point that I started to realize that there was a significant problem there, that I was losing customers, I was offered a position at one of these companies, one of the smaller ones, which I took. So I was in the IT there for a little bit, and then I ultimately moved over, in fact, to a position in the science department. Went into the lab and actually started doing chemistry. So I went out of the programming business altogether by that point. So ultimately, I stopped programming professionally roughly 20 years ago. I always kept up with it, at least for a while. I did some hobby projects. So we'll talk about I did some hobby projects for a while. Most notably, I used to play an MMO called Dungeons and Dragons Online, and I did the character planner for that, which was widely used and fairly popular. I maintained that for a long time. Of course, if you ever play MMOs, you know they change all the time. So I was constantly having to update and change that. I did that for a lot of years. That was probably the biggest project that I did for a long time. But I was all in C++. So yeah, I tried to keep up with it, but I actually, since I stopped playing that, and I won't go into the reasons that I stopped, it was a developer decision to modify some of their systems, which no longer made it possible for me to play the way I liked to play, and I stopped playing it. So when I stopped playing it, I stopped updating the character planner for that game, and basically fell out of any real serious C++ programming or programming of any sort, which is one of the reasons why I want to do this channel, because I'd like to keep my programming skills sharp, and I think they're kind of rusting. It's been a while since I've done any serious programming, so yeah. So that's my background. That's where I am coming from. I was a C programmer for a long time. When C++ was developed, I sort of gradually went into it. I used C++ as kind of an enhanced C, basically C with classes, like a lot of people did. And gradually started using more and more of the features of C++, and ultimately became quite the enthusiast for object-oriented programming. I'm very keen on keeping things object-oriented. I find if you've ever programmed something very, very complicated, and I have, you can keep it. The advantage of object-oriented programming is you can keep it clean, you can keep it maintainable in a way that you can't with, like, what is kind of derivatively called spaghetti code, or procedural code is really what it is. Is you call procedures. That gets to be very complicated very fast, and the interactions between things gets to be tough. Now, with object-oriented programs, you just program everything like it's an object. You give it certain characteristics, and you give it certain abilities based on the object that it is, and it's very easy to keep track of what's going on. So I'm a big proponent of that. Anyway, enough about me. That's enough of that. Let's go ahead and switch gears and talk about the strategy game that I am going to talk about on this channel. This is a game that is not new. Back when I was a professional programmer, and this is 25 years ago, 30 years ago maybe, I got into the idea of developing a strategy game, and it was called Manifest Destiny. And we got pretty far into it. There was a community around it. We even did a test game with about half a dozen of us playing the game. And so the inaugural playthrough of Manifest Destiny did happen. It was pretty short, and there was some bugs, and the whole point of it was kind of to expose the problems with the game as it was being developed. But we got into it fairly decently. So this is not a new concept. I'm not trying to. We're not developing a game that's never existed. I have a very clear idea of what game I'm going to be doing here, or we're going to be talking about. So you guys probably want to know, well, what the hell is this Manifest Destiny? So let's talk about that for just a second. What is Manifest Destiny? Okay. Let's go with a starting point. Because the easiest thing that I could possibly do is to give you, rather than try to explain what the game is to give you another game that is sort of like in the same genre. And we'll go from there, and then we'll talk about what's different. So the game I'm going to say we're going to start with, the game that you should bring to mind is Civilization. Okay, so start with Civilization. That's where we're going to start. We're in the same genre as Civilization. Everybody knows what Civilization is, right? If you've ever played strategy games, that's Sid Meier's kind of the game that kind of broke him into the world of games, I guess. Anyway, that's what we're going to start with. But I'm not trying to do a Civilization clone. I have no interest in doing that. I think there's some things we can bring to the genre that are a little more interesting than just making another Civilization. That's not what I'm after. So we'll talk about differences from Civilization. So let's go with A. Okay. So you've got a starting point. You know what Civilization is, right? The first difference is this is strictly how do you spell strictly? Strictly multiplayer. Or at least it's designed to be. That's not to say that we couldn't do a single player with AI opponents. We may do that, or I may talk about that at some point. But anyway, it's meant to be played by several characters, or several people characters. It's run by a host who kind of gathers together the players' stuff and played by several players. And we'll talk about that aspect of it in a little bit. Another difference is that one of these Civilization-style games, typically you have kind of a flat world, right? They basically ignore the North and South Pole. You get up to a certain point on the north side and on the south side, and the map stops and says you can't go any further that way. Which is, I understand that. It's reasonable, especially for early Civilization plays, that they can't get much higher than a certain point on the North Pole because it's difficult to get across the North Pole. It's an inhospitable environment, right? But in our case, we're removing that limitation. We are playing on a globe. This is not a flat world. This is a globe. So if your civilization has reached the point where you develop missiles, for example, those missiles can travel across the top of the North Pole and go hit the country on the other side if that's what you are intending to do. So yeah, we're playing on a true globe. Another difference is there are no hexes. This is Texel based. And what does Texel mean? If you don't know what a Texel is, it's like a pixel on your screen, except instead of being one pixel on your screen, it's one dot on a texture. Yeah, it's basically pixels and texels are related in a way, but basically you can kind of think of it as a pixel on your screen. Basically, you can go anywhere you want. There's no hexes. There's none of that thing where you have to move 6 hexes around or whatever whatever your movement rate is. You can move anywhere you want on any path you want to take. There's no limitations in that respect. So yeah. Okay. Those are the big ones that I can think of right off the top of my head. I've written down a few notes here, but I'm kind of doing some of this off the fly. So that's kind of the idea. So start with civilization, make those changes, and that's kind of what we're doing here. So let's talk about the game loop, because this is different than civilization as well. So, as I said before, there's a host and a series of players. In some cases, the host can also be a player. Not in every case. There's going to be some cases where the host has knowledge of the map that players shouldn't have, in which case the host couldn't be a player. They would just have to be able to watch the game, basically, as the players play it. But the host can be a player. We can set it up so that the host doesn't know anything more than the players know. And, in that respect, they can be a player. That's kind of important because if you can't be a player, sometimes, you have a hard time finding hosts. So you have a host and a series of players. The host is going to build the world. If I could type today, to build the world. Jeez, really, seriously. So there's going to be a series of parameters put together that's going to define the world. Basically, the size, maybe the resource density, stuff like that. Those parameters, by the way, if the host is going to be a player, then the players have to also know those parameters, and they will be public to the players. So anything that the host knows as far as generating the world will be public to the players as well. So that doesn't violate our rule about the host not knowing more than the players know. Okay, but they're going to build the world, and this is all going to be within the game. There's going to be a screen in the game that says we want to create a brand new world for the players to play on. This is a fairly complex endeavor. In fact, one of the things that caused me issues with the first iteration of this game. In the meantime, the players are going to develop their civilization. Now, there's not going to be a ton of things for them to do here. Basically, they're going to give it a name. Like they may be what's a good civilization name? I don't know, the Canadians. Or the Starks, right? If you want to do Game of Thrones, or the Two Rivers civilization, if you want to do something fantasy based. They'll give it a name. There may be a few other things that we stick in there that help define their civilization, but there really isn't going to be much. But they'll develop their civilization. Players will send that data in the form of a file to the host. So the players send their data to the host. So basically, the players go into the game, they input a few things. The game will create a civilization file that gets sent to the host. The host compiles all the players' civilizations. Those civilizations. And at that point, the host will complete the world. This maybe is a little bit out of order, actually. Let's stick this. Like, this is really more here, right? Because the host first needs the civilizations before they can develop the world. The world is basically going to create the land masses, place the resources that are available, and then it's going to place the civilizations that the host has compiled. At that point, the host sends the initial world state to each of the players. This is going to be different for each player. Basically, what's going to happen is the world will be generated. The game will place each of those civilizations on the globe somewhere. it's going to generate a single file per player. So the program is going to generate a file for each player, and for each player, they'll get to see the world kind of around where their starting point is. It's not going to give them anything else. It's just going to give them that one point. It's going to give them of course, the initial build conditions of the world. Anything else they need to know, but it won't give them anything that they don't need to know. So one of the rules of these kind of files is that you never trust the client. You don't put anything in that file that the game is not going to show them anyway. So yeah, you don't want to create one big player file and pass it out to everybody. You want everyone to get their own individual file. That's kind of the whole point. So that way, if the player happens to be a coder, they can't go into the file and discover other people's stuff, because there's nothing in there that's going to show them anything that the game doesn't already telling them. If that makes sense. I'm not sure if I'm getting that across right. Basically, never trust the player. You only give them what they need to see. So anyway, based on the information they have from that file, when they open up the game, they will give orders to their civilization. And this can be in the form of so we're starting to get into the game loop here. So suppose we're a ways into the game and we've got a few cities. Cities have factories, so you're going to give some orders to your factories. You're going to give some orders to your troops. Maybe you've got some settlers to move around. You're going to basically tell your people what to do, but no one's going to do anything. You're basically saying, this is what I want you to do. And then that's going to be your order set. That's going to be processed down into a file, kind of the orders file, and sent to the host. Okay. The host will then collect those files from each player, and the host will generate the next turn. Basically, what happens there is when the host gets those files, he'll say, okay, we're ready for the next turn to start. All those orders that were given are implemented. So your armies will move, your factories will build, your cities will do whatever they're doing, you'll collect resources, etc., etc. From that turn, there will be more player result files are generated, one per player, which are then sent back to the players. And then we go back to step 7. Back to step 7. Okay, so that's the game loop. Right? Basically, the players give their orders, they send them to the host processes those orders, and this is all done through the game. It's not, there's no, the host is not making decisions about, who wins what battle. It's all done internally. We handle it all through the game. It sounds more complex than it really is. It's complex in the terms of programming, but from the player's point of view, basically they're getting a file, they're opening up their game, they're seeing the information that they have available to them, and then they make decisions based on that information about what their troops should do or what their cities should do. He says, okay, this is what I want everyone to do, and then sends that back to the host, and then it just keeps going back and forth, right? So yeah, basically that's the game loop. One of the key things here, and it's maybe one of the things I should have put up here in differences, is that turns are processed simultaneously. Which means no one goes first. everybody goes at the same time. This is easy to do when civilizations don't interact with each other. If they do interact with each other, it gets a little more tricky. So usually, like in games like Civilization, whatever player goes first, they have the advantage. There's a huge advantage in being the attacker, right? The defender, there's no real win condition there, hardly. If you defend it successfully, then you kept territory that you already had. But if you don't defend successfully, you've lost territory. So there's no win condition. You don't gain anything really from it, other than maybe destroying the other player's armies. In this case, there is nobody who's going first. Everyone's going at the same time. So when two civilizations interact, like for example, two sets of armies collide and they fight it out, there's no real attacker and defender other than maybe one army is defending an area that they're in, but they could just as easily be considered the attacker as well. I mean, it's all simultaneous. There's no advantage to going first, basically, is what I'm trying to say there. Okay, one more thing I want to go over before we stop this kind of overview of what Manifest Destiny is, and that is research. Because that's key to the game. Just like in Civilization, research gives you more things to do. When we start off in a standard game, we're talking about caveman times here. Caveman level technology. We may not even have fire yet. That's kind of where I'm thinking about starting it. We'll kind of see where that ends up, but there's not going to be much. When you research something, you get a benefit. Is it an E? Yeah, it is an E. And that benefit can take the form of one of several different things. A template, a component, a city improvement, a world improvement, or a resource type. There may be more than that, and there was some talk back when we did this the first time about for lack of a better term, espionage, which may, and we may add stuff into this, but these are the basics. I'm gonna eliminate that for right now because it's kind of an add-on. So I'll have to talk a minute about what these are. So a template. A template is basically a basic type. This could be something like, for example, a vehicle, a person of some sort, not a specific person, but a type of person. It could be an aircraft, a watercraft of some sort, but it's not necessarily defined. So when I say like person, basically you'll have a blank slate. It'll have the outline of a person on it, and it'll have certain slots in that template. Those slots will be empty when you get the template. It's not pre-built, but you'll have slots. So there may be a weapon slot, an armor slot, other kinds of slots. Those are the obvious ones, but there may be others in there. What do you put in those slots? You put components. Things to put into template slots. So for instance, some sort of motor. Maybe a weapon, maybe an armor of some sort. Okay. And these are a little bit more specific, like the weapon may be a gun or a bow. The armor may be plate mail or an army helmet or something like that, right? These will fit into specific slots. Now you'll get multiples of these, right? So there'll be maybe your basic type is a vehicle, and you want to you have to put a motor into a vehicle, right? Well, you may have like a choice of multiple different motors to put in there, depending upon what kind of vehicle you're going to make. The combination of template plus components equals a blueprint. So you'll create, as you build your civilizations and you start to get more and more pieces through research, you'll get templates and you'll get components, and you'll put together a particular template and a component, and you'll name it. Like maybe you'll name it Marine, right? And this is a type of person. They'll have a gun of some form. They'll have some sort of body armor. They'll have some level of training, et cetera, et cetera. You will save that as a blueprint. It doesn't create a unit, but it means you now have this blueprint that you can use. Blueprints are now used to create units. So probably in cities. Did I misspell that? I did. In cities. So this is where you get your units from, right? So now you've created this blueprint. So we've created a Marine blueprint. Now we're going to start producing Marines based on that blueprint. Okay. So that's how it works. Now you can create, units of 50 Marines or whatever, based on the blueprint that you created from your template and your components. That's what that means. City improvements this is kind of self-explanatory, I think. Like factories, resource, storage, population, defenses, stuff like that. That's pretty obvious. World improvements are things like roads, bridges, resource gathering kind of items. Let me just say a word about the blueprints. Instantiating blueprints costs resources, obviously, and that's what you use to buy your units, right? Which is what you need your resource gathering for. And then resource types adds a new resource to the world map. So when you start off, maybe we only know about stone. Like there might be a whole forest right next to you as you start up the game. But if you don't know how to use wood, then it's not really going to show up as a resource that you can gather. Once you do the initial technology and realize, hey, wood is a useful component, it'll show up on your map, and then you can start gathering it. Some of those things may be obvious from the topology of the map, that the player will see that there's a forest sitting there and say, hey, there's wood resources there. As soon as I research, the ability to gather wood, we can go get it, and that's fine. I have no problem with that. Just because their civilization doesn't know about it doesn't mean the player's not going to. But other things like, say, oil, for example, is not going to be on the map until you realize there's a use for oil, and then it'll show up on the map. And you're not going to know as a player where it is, really, right? Because it's underground. Or things like, uranium, stuff like that wouldn't be obvious. Some things will be obvious just from the map. Other things will not. Yeah. Those are the basics as far as research goes. And the reason I point that one out in particular is because it's kind of central to the game. It drives everything else in the game is your research. So yeah, that's the whole thing. I think this is pretty standard strategy game stuff. The difference is we're texel-based. We're playing on a globe. Things are processed simultaneously, and it's basically a multiplayer game. Not to say that it couldn't be a single-player game if we use some AI components, and we may do that. just a word about this, guys. Do I realistically expect we're going to come out on the other side of this with a full-on game? Probably not. This is more about the journey than it is about the destination. If I really thought I could do this, I probably wouldn't be writing a channel about it. I would do it instead, because it's going to be much slower to talk about each of these individual things. Like I can already have been well into the coding by the time it's taken me to do this whole video. So right, so it's going to slow it way down. But I think it's the journey that's the interesting bit. I think I've got some stuff to say. I'm interested in what you guys have to say about things. So yeah, we'll take this journey together. So anyway, there you go. That's what this is all about. That's pretty much all I want to say. I'm really excited to get into the programming. In fact, I've already done just a wee little bit. We're going to go through it together. The first thing we're going to do is just a basic Windows loop. We're going to be in C++. Y'all, if you're programmers at all, have probably coded Windows loops a million times. There's almost no reason to go through it, except that I like to be thorough. You also need to get used to my programming style and what my expectations are, so you can decide whether you really want to follow along. If your expectations are different than mine, or your programming style is so different from mine that it jars on you, you may not want to watch. I mean, so I want to get into the programming as quickly as possible, so that those of you who decide you don't like my programming style can drop out and say, nah, I don't think this guy knows what he's talking about. But I did want to talk about the game just a little bit, so you guys know what we're going with this. Like I said, this game has existed for more than 20 years. We coded it. I spent a couple of years working on this, maybe even more than that, 3 years maybe. And we got pretty far into it, I would say. Definitely into a sort of alpha territory. I'm going to make a video about what went wrong. Ultimately, the game did fail, and I wanted to talk about why and what I would do differently today versus what I did back then. There was basically two big reasons, and I want to talk about both of those and what will have changed now based on what we did back then. What I would do differently to ensure that we have the best chance of success, even though I don't realistically expect to get a game out of this. I'm going to code as if we are. Okay, so yeah, that's the idea. So I'll talk about that, but I do want to get into the programming pretty quickly. So I think the next video on this channel is going to be a programming video rather than a design video, because we can all agree that the first step is to create the window thing, which is fairly basic, but nevertheless. All right. What else do I want to talk about? I think there's going to be no set schedule for this channel. I do have my other channel, a gaming channel, that has a set schedule, and that does take up quite a bit of my time. I also have a full-time job, family, and a very major construction project I've got going on in the backyard, and I'm trying to build a deck. All which take up a great deal of my time, but I do find I have some extra time. So I'm going to try to work on this. Like I said, no set schedule. I'm going to try to get out at least a video a week. What I expect is going to happen is we'll get a fair number of videos right at the start, and then it'll taper off as we get into more complicated things, and I have to do a little bit more research here and there. But so yeah, that's the whole idea. So we'll just see how it goes. I'm going to try to go videos about once a week. That would be the goal. I don't know if I'm going to regret saying that, but we'll see how it goes. So yeah. Anyway, okay, guys. I think I'm done rambling on. That's probably enough. This skit is getting way too long. So we'll stop there, and we will go into the next video and start doing some programming. So that'll be fun to do. So yeah, I'll see you guys then.